This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to rumble!
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. Today we are discussing the upcoming 2024 NBA Draft and what the Cleveland Cavaliers can do with the 20th pick. And since I have a rule in life where I try not to speak on things that I don't know anything about, I am thrilled to be joined by Ben Pfeifer, friend of the show, who actually knows what he's talking about when it comes to the NBA Draft. So Ben, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show once again to help carry this discussion.
Of course, someone leads you to believe that I know what I'm talking about. Yes. But yeah, I'm excited to talk draft. Obviously, very, very intriguing draft. Very intriguing Cavs off season. So there's a lot to talk about. I think there's a lot of potential routes we could go here, and I think as you've been tweeting, I believe that this is going to be a consequential one for them.
Yeah, no, I really think anyone who is kind of just dismissing this pick because it's the 20th pick and because it's, considered a weak draft, that I think that would be a mistake. Now, whether or not the Cavs keep this pick, we'll see. Of course, I'm sure we will see plenty of trade rumors over the next few weeks. But if they keep it, this is an important pick. And so I do want to say, Ben, been doing fantastic work over on YouTube and with his writing. So everyone, please go check him out. I will have all of those links in the description. And before we get into some specific prospects who we have picked out for the Cavs, I want to quickly get your overall thoughts on this draft because we've been hearing it for a while now. It's a weak draft, especially at the top. But for a team, especially like the Cavs, who are selecting at 20, it sounds like there's a handful of potentially valuable role players. I've heard that it's a deep draft. And so I want to get your overall assessment of this highly debated draft class.
Yeah, I think the quote-unquote narrative that it's a weak draft is true. I also don't think it's a particularly deep draft, especially late into the second round. But I feel like that's just going to be a trend because of how NIL is now and the decision-making process changing for a lot of guys on the fringes for staying or going. But even because it's even knowing it's a weak draft, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be valuable players. Like there are, more than 20 good prospects in this class. And even if I don't think it's the deepest or strongest class, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be good players. And as always, there are going to be players that I really like, or maybe the Cavs really like that other teams don't, that fall to that spot. So I never think that like 10 to 20 range is a bad one to be picking in. There seems to always be value to had in that range. Just like go look at any draft and you'll see some good picks in that area.
Exactly. Yeah, even like the weaker drafts, I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm misremembering, but 2013 I think was heavily considered a weak draft, and you got some very good players out of there.
Yeah.
I believe Giannis.
I would say this is
right.
Yeah. I would say this is most similar to that in terms of the drafts that I've seen, where I don't think there's like a legit star top prospect at number one. And there's going to be a lot of weirdness, but there's good stuff to be found. And hopefully Cleveland can. I'm looking at it right now. They had the 19th pick in 2013. Do you have any idea who they picked?
Oh, I'm going to know it as soon as you say it too. Who was it?
It was Sergei Karasev.
I knew it. Oh my God. I don't even know what happened to him.
Not a clue. It looks like he played a couple of years and then dipped out.
Yeah. Well, I know they drafted Joe Harris somewhere around, whether it was 2012, 2013, somewhere in that, maybe even 2014. So they were taking chances back then. They took Bennett. So that's all you really have to say about that class.
I mean, number one.
Yeah, I think that'll live in infamy forever. And again, like I said, I don't follow the draft too closely, but I have been over the last month and a half trying to do my best to take a deep dive on this class. And yeah, I'm not the authority on this, but it does seem like one of the weaker drafts I've seen. But as you mentioned, I mean,
you
see it every year.
Bad draft to be picking in the top 5, but it's not a bad draft to be picking anywhere else, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Cavs are in a good position there. And like you were saying, every year we find players who just like exceed expectations. So I'm sure there will be a handful of guys who
Right.
end up being very helpful players in the NBA.
Exactly. And even if I think the odds for finding a guy like that are lower this year than in
Mm,
most years, it's there are still chances and there's still players worth betting on and worth taking swings on. And
yeah.
I think quite a few players that we're going to discuss who will fit pretty well with the Cavs' short and long-term plans.
Yeah, and that craziness, that randomness is what makes the draft so fun at the end of the day. And for a team like the Cavs, who they've already collected so much talent, I do think it's really important that they continue to hit on the margins. And if they can find someone in this draft, whether they contribute right away or a year, 2, 3 down the line, that's huge in my opinion. So
Yeah.
we can go ahead and get into this because we have 5 players, I believe, who we have picked as our favorites for the Cavs. And now, of course, Ben is the expert here, so I will defer to him for most of this conversation, but I will start by saying I do enjoy basically all of these prospects.
Mhm.
Tristan Da Silva perhaps might be my favorite pick. I could be swayed on that. I know you had Da Silva going to the Cavs in your most recent mock draft, right?
I did. I think
So
that would be a fantastic fit.
is that the guy who you think makes the most sense for Cleveland?
Out of the ones that we went through, I'd probably prefer one or two other guys, but I like
Okay.
De Silva quite a bit.
Hmm.
And I think I'm maybe a tad bit lower on De Silva than consensus. And regarding your, quote unquote lack of expertise, I always think it's valuable to have like a fresh outsider perspective, right? Because like draft people, like I've been aware of a lot of these people, these prospects for like multiple years now, and there's a
Hmm.
certain level of fatigue that comes along with that.
Hmm.
So I think it's nice to get a fresh set of eyes um on these players. But De Silva, I think, is as good an option if the way you want to go is like a plug and play wing, which I can imagine a lot of Cavs fans would probably want. Um, he's just a 6'9", 6'10" dribble pass shoot wing. That's pretty much what you need to know about De Silva and the easy pitch for him. He's a versatile on and off ball shooter, really smart passer, can like run pick and rolls, can really dribble in tight spaces, and is a smart off ball defender. So all of that like sounds really great. I think it is really great. And I think any range in like that, like 18 to 20, 30 or whatever, I think is like all the teams are going to be wanting a player like that. But I think
Hmm.
he would make a lot of sense for Cleveland at 20.
Yeah, it's basically just that archetype that stands out right away. I mean, he's 6'8". It's a lanky guy, some fluid movements. Just seems like he has a natural feel for getting into his shots, kind of finding a rhythm, and he can convert a variety of looks. And so for the Cavs, it's hard not to get excited hearing, hey, this guy's 6'8" and he can shoot a little bit. He can play off
Yeah.
ball. That's what they've been begging for. So one question that I have about De Silva, and this is true for a couple prospects, but how do you factor his age into his draft value? He's 23 years old, which would make him older than Evan Mobley, and I think only a few
Yeah.
months younger than Okoro, who's entering his 5th NBA season, which is just crazy to say out loud. But are you concerned about his age in this scenario?
I think a little bit. Yeah. I value age a lot in my philosophy. I think it's the truest predictor of star upside that we have. But I will say that matters less when you get later in the draft and when you're looking for more
Mhm.
ready-made contributors. I just think you have to be more realistic with older players and their development tracks. As a lot of the time we see older rookies come in, like I think of like a Duarte or like a even like a Jaime Jaquez this year, who was really great at the start of the season, and then teams start to kind of figure these guys out. Not to say that those, can't be good players, but I do think that the age specifically matters. And I think for De Silva, it matters in the way that he is already an older guy and he's still pretty underdeveloped physically.
Mhm.
He's kind of a pure wing to me, which is fine because he can do all those things. But as a 6'9" ish player, ideally you'd like him to be able to do some big man stuff, some interior work, some finishing, some interior defense. And I'm not super confident that De Silva is going to get like a ton stronger or more developed. I think he definitely can, and NBA strength and conditioning is going to help. But he's already 23 and he's already struggled in this kind of way. So I think that definitely does matter. And I don't think because of that age and what he's done, I don't think there's any sort of star upside for Da Silva. But I think in terms of finding contributors, I don't think it's a problem to take older prospects or to believe in them. We just have to be realistic, I think, about what they can bring and what their development ceiling is going to be and how they can improve and stuff like that.
Mm. Yeah, those are all great points. And I think I basically have the same philosophy. It's just that they can come in and contribute, but it's that ceiling that you're more concerned with. Especially you like mentioning his frame is a really good point too. At 23, you would hope that he had developed a little bit more in that regard. So of course he can continue to develop once he gets to the NBA, but it's definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah.
Another prospect who I like for basically the same reasons I like Da Silva would be Jaylon Tyson. Another diverse kind of scorer. I like that he can handle the ball a bit. Again, good looking jump shot. He's 6'7". It looks like he has some physical tools that could potentially hold his own defensively. And he's also a little younger, 21 years old. So what are your thoughts on Tyson as a prospect?
I think Tyson would be my favorite for the Cavs out of this group. I like Tyson a little more than Da Silva, and kind of as you mentioned, because of his really great physicality and strength, along with his skill set, as we've said. Quickly, kind of relating to Da Silva, but also both. Da Silva has always had a very poor free throw rate. Is not someone who draws a lot of fouls, and I think that checks out with his kind of physicality profile. And as far as I can see, the only upperclassman who has really succeeded with the free throw rate drawing that Da Silva had in college is Trey Murphy. And I think that is kind of the vision for Da Silva, just like a giant shooter who can do a little bit off the bounce. But I think still, and Murphy was younger too, but still kind of limited. And whereas I think Tyson is more dynamic of an athlete, he's a better creator, he's a better shot maker off of the dribble. Tyson is probably a little more inconsistent and might have a little bit more of an adjustment period to the NBA and NBA offense, where Da Silva at Colorado played in a very off-ball heavy, cutting, moving type offense, whereas Tyson was the primary guy. He had 30 usage at Cal and was bringing the ball up the floor every time and finishing and starting all of their possessions. And I think that probably led to some of his inconsistency as a decision maker and as a defender. But I generally agree that his tools are great. He's really strong and physical and fast. He has a really nice handle. He flashes some pretty high level pick and roll stuff as well as a passer. I just really like the idea of betting on a guy like Tyson, who's strong, who is a versatile scorer, who's fairly smart, can finish plays. And I think if you can, get him within a system, help him learn more off ball with his strengths, that he could be really good. And just another big wing for the Cavs who can actually do stuff, who can dribble and can pass and can shoot ideally. So I think Tyson has a little more ceiling than Da Silva to be I don't know, probably not a star, but I think maybe he could be a really valuable secondary, tertiary scoring option. And I think that could also be a huge help as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. The thing that really stood out to me with him is the ball handling, like you said. Listen, as much as I want the Cavs to add some shooting to their wing spot and really just add a wing to begin with, but they also, one of the more underrated things that gets overlooked with the Cavs, they don't have enough guys who can dribble, who can handle the ball. That's why Max Strus was like a night and day difference, even when he wasn't making shots. So it was like, oh yeah, someone other than Donovan and Darius can run a pick and roll, and it just feels normal. And so adding someone like Tyson, even if there will be a development, it might take him some time, but it's just such a huge archetype for them to go after.
And that's what he'll bring. He has that scoring versatility where he can run pick and rolls and hit pull-up jumpers off of the dribble, which is probably the main thing that you're looking at if you really buy his ceiling. It's this 6'7" guy is a really prolific off dribble shooter. Maybe we can turn that into something more. But he's also someone who's very comfortable making interior reads out of the pick and roll and playing as a scorer in the paint. So I think there's a lot of stuff that you can squeeze out of Tyson. I do have some worries about, right, like him being an older guy, and there still being some concerns when it comes to his decision making and the consistency on both ends. But at the, the 20th pick or whatever, I think this is your time to take chances on like talented guys who might fall for other reasons that otherwise you wouldn't be able to have access to it all. So I would love Tyson on the Cavs. I think his ceiling is high and his ability to contribute pretty quickly is also pretty high. So
yeah, I think it's definitely a player like Tyson is a good gamble to take at 20, especially if, and not to get too deep into this, but if Mitchell extends, I've said this a few times in the pod, if he extends, it gives you a little breathing room to have someone like Tyson come in, and he doesn't have to contribute his rookie season. It could be his second year or even his third year. If you have some time to really work on him. And again, just that ability to create your own shot at a position other than a guard would really help the Cavs.
right.
So
I love the idea of oftentimes I feel like drafting for fit is usually just not as good practice as people like to think because of how quickly rosters change in the NBA. Something that's a big need for a team might not be in a year or two because of unexpected developments or trades or free agency signings. And something that is not a need at all might be a need sooner than you think because of injuries or retirements or regression or trades or whatever like that. So maybe for, they're looking at, hey, we have Max Strus and he's good. Maybe we don't want to have to think about maybe we'll draft Tyson as some sort of insurance because we're probably not going to want to pay him when he's 33 or whatever on his next deal. So I think that's another way to think about these. It's not only like how can these guys contribute right now, but how can we draft players who help us maintain the depth and the talent that we already have.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah, there's obviously the archetype that the Cavs are looking to fill, which would be that kind of 3-and-D role guy, but they could also just use anyone in the front court who could provide a little bit of scoring from the perimeter. That's not something they've really had since Lauri Markkanen, and I'm mentioning him for a very specific reason because, listen, I don't think Kyle Filipowski is anywhere near that player, and I'm not saying he will develop into that, but the similarities are there. And while the Cavs, I think they should be looking to fill the wing, Flip gives them a potential floor spacer that can pair with either big in the second unit at his best. And so what do you think of that, of him landing in Cleveland?
Yeah, I'm a big Filipowski guy. And I think if he ends up being good, he could end up being like really, really good for them. I love him because of his versatility, especially on the offensive end, where Filipowski can do the traditional big stuff where he's, finishing at the rim, he's grabbing rebounds, he's sealing and stuff. And although I think Filipowski can definitely use like some more strength, especially in his like torso midsection to bump guys. He is younger. He's, only a sophomore. And I think Flip is maybe the best passing big in this entire draft, or at least he's up there. He's maybe the best ball handling big in this entire draft, or at least he's up there. And he can do so many things. He can play in the post. He can play from the perimeter. He can run pick and rolls. He can be the roller in pick and rolls and make good passes. And I think obviously shooting is going to be a swing for him, but I think if Flip can sustain what he did this year, which was around 35% on solid volume, which I think is definitely possible, then I think you have a really good versatile big. And I think Flip's defense is solid. I think he improved as a mover. That same size and physicality helps him defend the interior, and he's generally a pretty smart guy positionally. I don't think he's ever going to be an incredible defender, but when you have Evan Mobley and or Jarrett Allen, depending on how this goes, you can kind of get away with your other bigs or forward players not being as stellar defensively because of those guys you have. And I think the kind of offensive versatility that a big like Filipowski could bring you is really, really enticing. All of the different things he can do and ways he can contribute are, I think, beget possible future upside, like to be a really good offensive player, and just like will allow him to contribute in some ways early in his career too. So I would like that a lot. I think it would be really interesting as well. So
yeah, again, not a one-to-one comparison that I'm making, but if you think of the way the Cavs used more recently Kevin Love and Markkanen, that's the type of role that you would kind of want Filipowski to fill. Now, of course, he's not going to fill it to the same degree, but if you look at what they've been trying to use in that place since then, it's been George Niang, Dean Wade, where hypothetical Dean Wade is a really good fit, but you don't want to rely on him as much as they've had to recently. And so if Flip can come in and fill that even to some degree within the next few years, you would feel really good about that pick. And again, so much of like my wish list just comes down to the very simple premise. Are you tall and can you shoot? And it seems like Flip can check both of those. And you mentioned the passing. That's really big to me too, because I think in today's NBA, it's just as important for a front court player to be able to handle the ball a little bit and create plays as it is for them to develop a three-point shot. I think if you're able to handle the ball as a forward, it makes all the difference. It's just as important as being able to shoot. So, and again, if we continue to look at age, Flip, 20 years old. So we're getting progressively younger as we go through the list. And it's, again, a good gamble to take, I think.
Yeah, for someone who can legitimately like drive and pass off of the live dribble and make really confident, difficult reads and can create space with his handle and all of this stuff, I'm willing to take that bet and say, okay, I'd rather bet that our development staff can get Filipowski to a consistent shooting level than bet on, a shooter without the skills that he has, because it's much harder to teach what Filipowski has than kind of other way around, right? Flip is, I think, not guaranteed to be a great shooter, but I think there's enough flashes, especially from we saw this year, him increasing his volume, increasing his percentages, that he could be good enough to where he can really threaten defenses with his great ball skills, which, as you said, I absolutely agree, are so important for modern bigs to be able to dribble and pass and do all of these things. These are really like cheat code, like checkmate type skills that we see all of the great teams have players that can do this stuff. And I think Flip could really be that for a team at some point.
Yeah, and on that note, this is a good way to transition to another prospect who I like, but he has the shooting, but he maybe lacks all those tertiary skills that Flip has, especially just the passing and the feel for the game. That would be Tyler Smith out of the G League Ignite. Now, I'm really interested in him as a prospect because his game is incredibly raw, but at 19 years old, that jump shot is so sweet. And it's important to me that he seems to have so much confidence in his shooting. And with that size, he could be a really fun pick and pop guy in the NBA. It's just, again, it's a concern that the rest of his game is very underdeveloped. So I want to ask, what excites you and concerns you the most with Smith?
Yeah, Smith of this group of guys that we're talking about is certainly the furthest away from contributing, but also possibly has the highest ceiling out of any of these prospects, and especially on the offensive end. Yeah, Smith, I mean, not going to turn 20 until midway through his first NBA season, and he is one of the best shooters in this draft, off the dribble, off screens, face-ups, pick and pops. He's a really, really deadly shooter. And he's, like you said, is supremely confident and can really make things happen as a shot maker. He's an interesting prospect to me because, as I talked about in a YouTube video I did somewhat recently, like he really is like a throwback stretch four, which is kind of not like an archetype we see because everyone's like a big or like they're like a wing. But Smith is kind of four-ish to me, where I don't know if he's tall enough to be a center, and I don't know if he's skilled enough yet to be a wing, but he is, 6'9", 6'10", 7'1" wingspan and can shoot the hell out of the ball. So I think it's pretty easy to understand the pitch for him, especially when you pair that with some of the flashes of craft finishing and driving, but he is quite raw. Smith is a really bad defender. There's not much else, there's, you can sugarcoat it all you want. And there are some flashes of rim protection and, movement and stuff, but he's just not very strong or explosive as a defender. The positioning is out of whack. And I definitely want to say that like G League Ignite as a whole is a disaster on both ends, especially defensively. And that certainly wasn't helping him. And I think getting him into a real system like this guy, like the fact that like defensively thinking about it, his formative years have been spent at Overtime Elite and G League Ignite. Like not exactly bastions of like, fundamental play and defense and stuff like that. So I think maybe you can kind of argue and have some optimism that that's a potential point of upside of room for growth when you get him with some better coaching and teammates and stuff. But he is just very raw on offense. He's not a great decision maker outside of shooting. He's not a consistent driver or playmaker at all. And Smith is probably someone who I wouldn't expect to be a real contributor in year one or maybe even year two. But if Cleveland is patient, is willing to be patient with the guy, and maybe like this is a more likely pick in a world where Donovan does extend, right? Like you have that locked in, and you're like, we're gonna take a guy who we think could be really, really valuable for us in a year or two. And let's say we don't want to pay Dean Wade down the line. We move on from Allen. We don't have a Niang type. Like Tyler Smith will be ready to slot in and shoot the hell out of the ball and hopefully be good enough on defense. And I think that's a really enticing package at this stage in the draft.
Yeah, it's really easy to talk yourself into the upside there. Do you think that with a player like Smith, does it benefit him to go to a team like the Cavs who can maybe kind of stash him away a little bit, hide some of his flaws, let him slowly develop? Or is it better for him to go to, I don't know, the Pistons or a team that can just throw him into the fire and let him work through whatever flaws he has? What kind of developmental path? Or is it all kind of the same? At the end of the day, is the prospect just going to develop however they were going to begin with?
I mean, this is the $1 million question, right? Like,
yeah.
If you have an answer, you could probably make a lot of money with some basketball team. But I think Smith, because he's not like a ball handler or an initiator or someone who needs as many like live reps on the ball, I think slow playing him up with a team like Cleveland who's good and has shown that they can develop players is probably the best, the preferred option for Smith, just because so many of his issues to me are related to like physicality and maturity and stuff that he should gain with age and strength training. Obviously not every prospect does, right? But a lot do. And I think just gaining that strength and confidence and kind of structure is going to be really valuable for Smith. Learning how to play within a system that's already good. Like, you're not dropping Smith into a disaster like the Pistons where it's just a free for all. It's like, okay, the Cavs are a good playoff team that has things in place and has their players in place. So Smith will have to learn how to fit into a system like that. And I think for a guy like Smith, who maybe you're not projecting to be a legit star, maybe that's possible if he can be like a crazy, crazy shooter. But if not, then I think a guy like Tyler Smith would really benefit from like learning how to play within a system and play within a role. My favorite Tyler Smith comp has been Channing Frye, which I don't think is perfect.
I could get down with that.
But I think it makes a lot of sense as like this traditional stretch four who is really good can score a little in the mid range, can defend a little. I think his ceiling is higher than that and his floor is lower than that. But I think it's a possible like median-ish outcome for Smith, a guy like that. Or I even think of like a Ryan Anderson type as like these throwback stretch fours. But I do think Smith would benefit from sitting and playing in the G League and all this stuff.
Yeah, I love that comparison. That's a good one. And I do think the Cavs have a good roster around Smith to really kind of hide some of his flaws. Obviously, they can cover up for him defensively if he's paired with one of the bigs. And then you have two guards who, if they put him in pick and pop, I think that would be a lot of fun to watch.
Exactly. And especially considering his guards at Ignite were like John Jenkins and like Admon Gilder and a bunch of teenagers. Like it's going to be night and day for him getting to a team where he has playmakers who can consistently set it up. And this is true for basically every prospect, but I think it's especially true for a guy like Smith, given his history.
Yeah, just watching him be able to spot up and knock down catch and shoot threes, that would be a lot of fun. But to round out our discussion, we have one more prospect worth mentioning, and that is DaRon Holmes out of Dayton. Now, I would like to say that I've gone on record saying that Kobe Altman should, quote, be fired into the stratosphere if he doesn't draft a wing. But I can carve out an exception for a backup big. And it's really the backcourt that Kobe needs to avoid because, yes, the Cavs could use some depth in that department, but they have a glaring need for players who are taller than 6'6". And even if they keep both bigs, you need a backup big in this rotation. I think someone who you can rely on. So Holmes is a good prospect to look at because by all accounts, he seems to be a promising, versatile big man who can find some sort of role in the NBA. The jump shot seems to be developing nicely. And really, the Cavs haven't had a capable backup big in quite some time. I know Tristan Thompson was inspiring at various moments, but you don't want to rely on him.
Right.
The bar has been
Ideally,
low.
you'd have a backup big who you can rely on without PEDs. Like, it's,
Yeah.
and I think
I don't think we're going to get a 25-game suspension from Holmes. I hope not.
Hopefully not. Yeah. And I guess to quell some of your concerns, I think Holmes is like as wingy as the bigs get in this class
Okay.
because of his ball handling, as we talked about with
Mm.
Flip, but I think even more so with DaRon, who Dayton runs really cool stuff, and they had him running like invert pick and rolls as the ball handler, and he's very comfortable in like NBA style dribble handoff actions. He can legitimately like dribble in tight spaces and get himself to his spots and set up himself and his teammates. He's not a fantastic passer, and his shooting is good, but not like incredible or anything.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to a guy like Filipowski, where like I think it's they're a good bet to be a shooter. Not going to be like a special crazy shooter like Tyler Smith, for example, but they're going to be able to space the floor and be a threat. And I think the thing that's so unique about Holmes is that most of these perimeter-oriented young bigs really struggle on the interior because they've grown up playing as perimeter guys. But Holmes kind of did his development in reverse, where coming out of high school, he was just like a traditional like post-up interior defense big, where he flashed some like perimeter stuff, but wasn't really thought of as a super serious prospect until recently, when it's like, holy shit, this guy can really dribble and flashes some passing and score for himself, and also be a great lob catcher and post scorer and pick and roll defender. He's not like an incredible. He is like a little short for the center size. I think he's like 6'10-ish. He's not huge or anything, but he's a sound pick and roll defender. He's a sound interior defender. I don't think he's going to be an incredible player on that end, but he's going to be good. He's going to be useful. And I think when it comes to players who are useful in a unique and valuable modern role, like Holmes is just so perfect in that spot. And I think he's a great fit for most teams. I think he would for sure work in Cleveland. He can absolutely play with Evan Mobley. I think he's honestly a perfect fit. Like, there's been a lot of smoke about OKC targeting him as a pair with Chet, and I think a lot of that reasoning applies to the Cavs too. Like, you have a guy in Mobley who's like a demon perimeter ground coverage, a bit skinnier, and Holmes is like, okay, you're a more traditional interior defensive guy who can also play on the perimeter and do the offensive stuff you need. So I would really like Holmes. Look, it's looking like he might not even be there at 20.
Yeah.
But if he does, I certainly think he should be in consideration. And of course, getting an Ohio guy.
Of course. And yeah, everything you said makes just a ton of sense. If he's available at 20, you definitely have to take a hard look at him. I feel like those spry, versatile bigs who have some perimeter feel, those are valuable. I think like that's basically as safe a bet of being a useful player somewhere in your rotation. I feel like those coordinated bigs, just because it's not very often you see guys that big who move that well. You mentioned handling the ball, stuff like that. Just any sort of perimeter feel, any sort of touch. I know the jump shot, from what I was looking at, sounds like a point of contention. People aren't really fully bought in on it. So I'm wondering where do you think, how will that develop? Do you think he'll be a true floor spacer, or is this kind of just hey, he can hit a couple shots from the perimeter?
I think he can be a pretty legit floor spacer. It's definitely going to take time, but as I kind of mentioned before, Holmes was not a shooter at all, pretty much.
Yeah, that's what
in
it
high
looked
school and in the early years of his career. Like, he maybe did a little bit of it, but for him it was mostly just, if he took it, it would be like a wide open corner three or something like that. But now he's legitimately taking shots above the break. His jumper is a lot smoother. His touch is pretty good, and he got his free throw percentage up quite a bit this.
Yeah.
His free throw percentage has improved every year of his career. His 3-point percentage has improved every year of his career. His volume has improved every year of his career. And I think that like steady track of improvement, rather than a guy who's like, oh, he just had one crazy shooting year after 3 years of not shooting. I'm like, okay, I can see the incremental progression. And like I said, Holmes like for most of his basketball life, probably just hasn't really needed to shoot to be a great player. And I think that's the case for a lot of these young, talented athletes, where it's like maybe they're not shooters, not because they can't, but because they've never really had to. And obviously that's not like a great thing, right? But it's not like you're in love with that. But I think for Holmes, a guy who has the volume and is willing to shoot off the dribble and shoot off movement at times, and will take like mid-range jumpers. And one of the main things for shooting translation that I value is that like mid-range shot creation. And Holmes is an incredible guy and like face-ups and fadeaways and stuff like that. So that's another potential area where it's like maybe you can extend your touch out from theirs.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Holmes is going to be a good shooter. I don't think he's going to be an incredible elite shooter or anything, but I think he'll probably end up being a genuine threat from out there. Not someone who's, making 3-point contests, but someone who defenses have to pay attention to, which is kind of what you want.
Yeah. I mean, that would be huge for the Cavs to get anybody who the defense will pay attention to at that position. So,
yeah.
And, I hate to do the player comp, so I want to be so clear to everyone listening that I'm not comparing these players one-to-one. But someone who I was looking at is even someone like Naz Reid, who goes undrafted just a few years ago. I think he shot 33% in college. Now he's the sixth man of the year. And again, I'm not saying Holmes will become that caliber of player, but it's just another reminder that this isn't something this pick isn't worth overlooking.
I think like the success of Naz Reid, even though he's not necessarily a, one-to-one, I think that's a great feather in the cap of Holmes, is someone like Naz, who came out, who had a ton of problems as a prospect. Obviously, he was younger than Holmes when he got drafted, but he ended up working largely because of his really special ability to handle the ball at his size. And I think he's kind of the poster child for, Naz is an incredible decision maker. He's not an incredible athlete, but he's able to be a super valuable playmaker and scorer because of that incredible skill as a handler. And I think Holmes, while, maybe a little less juice as like a creator than a guy like Naz, probably is a better actual big in terms of like interior defense and rebounding and all that, and shot blocking and defense and all of that stuff. So Holmes is a really great bet in the modern NBA. These kind of like combo bigs who are able to contribute as a 4 and as a 5 sometimes and work with a bunch of different lineups are in vogue for a reason. And I think Holmes is a good bet to be like a possible next in line there.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. I think all these prospects that we talked about to varying degrees, there's a reason why you might take a bet on them. And so I think, again, I wouldn't overlook this draft pick. I think there's a lot of fun potential here, whether it's a guy who can come in and contribute potentially right away like Da Silva, or someone like Smith or Holmes, where maybe you take, I think Holmes could come in and contribute pretty soon too, but someone like Smith, who might take a little longer to bring
Holmes would be contributing from he's one of the ones who would be contributing from day one. Absolutely.
Yeah. Especially just because again, everyone focuses on the need for a wing, but hey man, Holmes would be competing with Tristan Thompson, George Niang, and Damian Jones for minutes. So I think there's a realistic path where he could actually be a very helpful upgrade there on various nights. So
I love having a utility big who you can play with, assuming they, who knows what they do with their roster, but assuming they don't change things, like who can play with whatever big you want to throw out there. Like, okay, yeah, we can throw DaRon with Mobley and have him as more of an interior guy. We can throw DaRon with Allen and have him as more of a perimeter guy. And I think he can be competent at least in both of those roles, which is just such a valuable commodity to have. Are guys who can be flexible, and it's hard to like game plan and take them out of games. And I think Holmes fits that.
Yeah, versatility is key in the NBA, and that's one thing the Cavs have been missing, is a lot of that lineup versatility, who a player like Holmes could bring to them. That's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Ben, it was a pleasure, as always. Very grateful that you helped join to break down these prospects. And again, for anyone who is interested in this draft class, go check out Ben on Twitter and YouTube. He is your plug for what to expect on draft night with these prospects. So give him a look. And for those who enjoy this podcast, I want to give a thanks and suggest that if you enjoy the show, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like. It truly does help the channel and I have content planned all throughout the offseason. You don't want to miss it. So thank you again. And with all that being said, go Cavs.